And welcome to The Pill, which we're going to dedicate today to Jeff Koons' retrospective at the Whitney Museum. With this retrospective, the Whitney Museum is changing its building, and this would be considered like a blowout before that move actually happened. The old Marcel Breuer building is going to be taken by the Metropolitan Museum, and the Whitney is moving downtown. But I want to take the opportunity to discuss Jeff Koons' show, which I think is excellent, to discuss through him the difficulties that the critics, the art critics, the top art critics, in particular Jerry Saltz with Vulture and Roberta Smith with the New York Times, are finding to address the issues of contemporary art without falling on one side on the criticism of the materialism of the art market, which was started by Robert Hughes, or falling into a strictly purist modernist category of art that basically leaves contemporary art out of it. So I think this generation of 50, 60 something year old art critics like Saltz and Roberta Smith are stating a series of problems in the way they consider the artistic value and the artistic identity in themselves. So, shall we start? Jeff Koons at the Whitney today. Both Jerry Saltz and Roberta Smith reviews agree in one point. They differentiate Jeff Koons' artistic value from his ability for self-presentation and self-promotion. They tend to reject the former and praise the latter, but also praise how brilliantly the exhibition at the Whitney has been curated and organized by Scott Rothkopf, the Whitney's associate director of programs. It needs to be said that this show is a farewell blowout before the Whitney sits its Marcel Breuer building to its new tenant, the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It is apparent that Jerry Saltz does not like Jeff Koons, and Roberta Smith cannot afford not to like him. There seems to be both in Vulture and the New York Times a certain disdain in the way they talk about the show as only pumped up by ambition and the art market. Although I basically agree with Koons worshipping the golden calf, I think that is precisely why his work should be discussed according to the rules of pop art, and not as Saltz and Smith suggest, which seems to be following the example of Robert Hughes and that American modernist tradition of art criticism, which has failed to address pop art as such. That is why the best way for them to react to Jeff Koons' body of work is by accusing him of all the evils of the contemporary art world that they have helped consolidate during the past 20 years. When I refer to the modernist tradition of art critics and Robert Hughes, I'm basically referring to his Curse of the Mona Lisa, which is a must-see for all of those interested in these issues, and you can find it in my blog taboofart.org. I mean, Robert Hughes is it's a role model for all art critics, but I want to problematize him at this point. His point in that in the Curse of the Mona Lisa reaches its climax during his interview with one of the most powerful collectors of Andy Warhols. I'm talking about Robert Mugabe, who has so many Warhols that he has made a fortune out of controlling its prices through strategic buying and selling through Sotheby's and Christie's. So it is when Robert Hughes asked the question why Mugabe thinks that Andy Warhol is the best artist of all times, that we can see the king in its full nakedness. The collector does not know and does not care about what he collects. It is obvious. It is business and reputation management for him. However, I think it is a mistake to accuse Warhol or Jeff Koons for making evident the inherent contradictions of late capitalism and of our culture in general. I guess what I'm trying to say here is that Robert Hughes does not know what to do with pop art, and because of that he ends up disqualifying it as uninteresting, as not having anything to say, or as not expressive enough. In the context of the malaise of the contemporary art world, Roberta Smith and Jerry Saltz find it very difficult to be fair with Jeff Koons, and one feels that they run to make fun of him to the point of bullying. One can sense a resentment of sorts in the latter's disdainful review. But let me be more precise. In the New York Times, Roberta Smith's art criticism is fueled by the modernist belief that art, even when reproduced at an industrial standard, as was the case during minimalism, with Donald Judd, for example, and it is the case with the likes of Anish Kapoor and Jeff Koons himself. So she believes that it's allegorical. Maybe that is the reason why she says that at the Whitney, and I'm quoting her, its opening salvo is a stunning alley of bizarre pharaonic splendor, 6 pieces consisting of gleaming vacuum cleaners encased in plexiglass and suffused with an insistent glow. Every appliance or pair of them rests on a raft of fluorescent light that almost deflect your gaze. Impersonal yet deeply familiar, the vacuum cleaner pieces introduce the essential seduction-repulsion dynamic that is basic to most of Mr. Koons' art. Here, Roberta Smith analyzes Jeff Koons' pop art through the lenses of minimalism. Why? Why is she doing this? Why not discussing it from inside pop art and compare that isolation and plexiglass framing from the point of view of, for example, Roy Lichtenstein's flirtation with the Mondrianesque abstractions in his golf ball of 1962 that we are seeing now, where our understanding of representation is what is being tested. There, Lichtenstein shows representation as articulated through conventional codes and as a matter of science that often bear little resemblance with the actual things. On the other hand, when a Mondrian begins to look like a golf ball, the category of abstraction, indeed of aesthetic autonomy, is also in trouble. It is interesting that Roberta Smith decided to start his review of the Koons show with these pieces in particular, because they are exactly where Koons brings into sculpture the concerns that Lichtenstein had with painting. While his predecessor was thinking about Mondrian, Lichtenstein, Koons is establishing a dialogue with Donald Judd, for example, in an analogous way by putting appliances in a plexiglass box and illuminating them from inside. We must agree with Roberta Smith that Jeff Koons establishes a dialogue with Dan Flavin, Marcel Duchamp, and Donald Judd. However, for some mysterious reason, she forgets to say that the dialogues only occur through and from within pop art, more specifically the concerns raised by Roy Lichtenstein. Jeff Koons is before anything else a pop artist. In other words, we can see in Koons those concerns that Lichtenstein had at the level of painting, but in this case they become three-dimensional. We should bear in mind that Lichtenstein's sculptures were mainly flat. So Koons is intelligent enough to take that exploration forward, and we must thank him for that, not punish him. If you ask me what are those concerns that Koons take from Lichtenstein, I would say that Koons uses extreme inflation, both physical, literal, and economical, the prices of his work, as a way to convey deflation. So inflation always takes to deflation in Koons' world. So when we see a deflated sculpture, or one that could potentially deflate at any time, as in the lobster or the flowers of the Proserpina, why not thinking about the analogy of the sexual erection orgasm and posterior flabbiness? And more importantly, that of inflation of prices, deflation of artistic value. Shockingly, both Roberta Smith and Jerry Saltz not only overlook this series of analogies, but go even further so as to accuse him for exactly that he is accusing the system for. By embodying the alpha male super rich male artist, Jeff Koons is making it evident its own weaknesses, and that is his point. To magnify to the point of making obvious the cracks in the mirror that not only we use for looking at ourselves, but also for creating a whole system of social values, narcissistic values. In fact, when discussing a key piece like Play Doh, which I think is the masterpiece of the show, Jerry Saltz confesses not knowing what to make of it. Then he considers ironic that his latest piece, that is, this is his latest piece, is his best. What is that remarkable that his best piece is his last one? Wouldn't that be logical? Let me add to this that Jeff Koons is problematizing perception as such in this piece through vision and tact. In other words, how should art understand knowledge in times of mass media, communications, and virtual reality? Well, whether in Lichtenstein, and even more so in Andy Warhol, we were moving away from the old notion of the self-made ego in the romantic or existential forms, towards a new view of the individual as structured by a symbolic order that precedes him or her. In Jeff Koons, we see how the monumental and the wondrous of applied technology define today's subject. That is why when Roberta Smith says that Koons' recurring themes of flotation, inflation, and hollow forms should be considered as allegories of the state of grace, the human desire for things or for other people and for joy, the inherent energy of the objects, the human life cycle, one seems to wonder whether Roberta Smith is going through a mystic crisis, because it has nothing to do with Koons or what pop art stands for, which are only issues of perception or representation. The homage to Liechtenstein is obvious in the Popeye, or Pop Eye, which for Liechtenstein was a pun on the bang on the eye of the advertising era, playing with dimensions and with materials. Koons takes this to the realm of sculpture and makes them, as the curator Scott Rothkopf says, concussive or concussive. It is interesting that both Roberta Smith and Jerry Saltz decided to ignore the Popeye even when the reading seems to be mainly allegorical, and it would have given them the answer that they were looking for. Another comparison with Liechtenstein has to do with the finishing of the works. In fact, Liechtenstein said, "I'm not against industrialization, but it must leave me something to do." Again, these concerns can be seen in the way Koons seems to invest excessive amounts of money, time and energy magnifying toys not in order to reproduce them, but instead to recompose them and in the process give them a different shine. It is that polished quality of the sculpture in which not only the viewer can see himself reflected, but also the space that contains both him and the sculpture. The surface of the sculpture reflects the image as in a CCTV. It becomes like a monitor, a screen. From this point of view, I think that Jerry Saltz goes too far when saying, and I'm quoting Jerry Saltz, "No, Koons is not our Warhol, as so many claim. Warhol's complex aura changed everything, whereas Koons is cheery, centerless, more of a bland Mitt Romney Teletubby than a mysterious force of nature." I think that having put that comparison in those terms is unfair to both of them, because Koons' obsession for polished surfaces, as is the case of Anish Kapoor, emulate Warhol's preoccupation for the obstruction of sight. Let's not forget that Warhol was the artist of the sunglasses and wigs. Let me put it more clearly. The way vision is deformed in Jeff Koons' abduction of Proserpina, or the balloon on top of his reproduction of the Hercules Farnese, is reminiscent of Warhol's yarns, paintings, where a vision is scattered instead of blinded. This brings us to concerns of Jeff Koons' interplay of the inside and the outside of the work of art, which is a direct reference to Andy Warhol monumental artistic project. I'm referring, of course, to the way he took the outside and put it on the inside and vice versa. The thing is that pop art aims at the confusion of private and public, one deepened in the expanded spectacle of the 1960s, which Warhol both exposed and exploited, as Koons has also been doing for almost 20 years now. However, Jerry Saltz's biggest mistake happens when he blames Jeff Koons for being an exhibitionist to the point of vulgarity. Of course, he does this while accusing Koons of not having succeeded in creating the same kind of public persona that Warhol did. In Saltz's words, at Vulture, he says, "Everything about Koons was played out in public. The hype, the high prices, the collector love, the critical cringing, his Twinkie-like quotes, like it's like I have God on my side or something, and the almost career-killing spectacle he put up in 1991. The show of enormous photographic paintings of himself was with waxed chest and having anal sex with his porn star ex-wife Ilona Staller, better known as La Chicholina. Of course, his artistic persona should be seen as constructed in opposition to that of Andy Warhol, who was an exhibitionist, but also its opposite. He was an exhibitionist and he was playing hide and seek all the time. Even before his fatal shooting in 1968, he countered his vulnerability with physical supports and psychological defenses, like his entourage, or like wigs and sunglasses. Warhol also possessed a weird ability to attract quasi-doubles like Eddie Sedgwick or Nico, the singer from the Velvet Underground. By contrast, Jeff Koons is currently building muscle and is becoming a caricature of himself. However, as Saltz himself confessed, he's making the best art of his career. So that persona seems to be still in control of the person. I think the masterpiece of this show is played though, which is a knockout to the eye and a goad to the mind. It might stand as an imperishable symbol of art present world,